Athens did not build theater for entertainment. They built it because their citizens were dangerous, not irrational, not uneducated. Dangerous in a more precise way. They could justify anything. Power could look like justice. Certainty could feel like truth. And the worst decisions did not feel wrong while they were being made. So the question was not how to control people. It was this: how do you make a human being feel the cost of a decision before it destroys them? Laws cannot do it. Courts act too late. Philosophy convinces only those already willing to listen. None of these reach the moment where a choice is made. And the Athenians understood something uncomfortable. Intelligence does not prevent catastrophe. It often enables it. So they built something else. Not a law, not a system, an experience. They built a theater. And then they did something no modern society would accept. They made attendance a civic obligation. If you were too poor to afford the entrance fee, the state paid it for you. Because the state needed you there. Thousands of citizens sitting together watching the same story. Not for pleasure, but for training. Not of the body, of judgment. This is the part that should bother you. Why would a democracy, the most politically experimental system in the ancient world, stake part of its survival on men wearing masks, speaking in verse on a hillside? What did they think was happening in that space? What did they understand about human decision-making that we don't? To answer that, you have to look at a man who had already seen what bad decisions cost. Athens, 458 BCE, before dawn. Aeschylus is 70 years old. He has stood in battle at Marathon. He has watched his city nearly erased by the Persians. He has seen what happens when survival depends on the judgment of ordinary men. The structure that allows human life to exist without collapsing into chaos. The chorus standing together, not heroes, not visionaries. Just ordinary people who understand something the individual refuses to accept. A city cannot survive if everyone follows only their private conviction. Now, here is the trap. If the individual is always right, law dissolves. Every person becomes their own authority. Order breaks. But if the city is always right, something essential dies. Conscience becomes irrelevant. Justice becomes obedience. So choose. If you stand with Antigone, you defend something sacred, but you weaken the structure that keeps society alive. If you stand with the city, you preserve order, but you risk destroying what makes that order worth having. There is no clean answer. That is the point. Greek tragedy does not solve this. It forces you to sit inside it, and that is where understanding begins. Not when you find the right answer, but when you realize there may not be one. Now here is where it becomes strange. Because all of this precision, this philosophical depth, does not begin in a theater. It begins with men who are drunk, dancing, wearing goat skins, losing their individual identity, in a crowd moving as one body. No characters, no structured dialogue, no audience as we understand it, only rhythm, voice, repetition. This was not primitive entertainment, it was ritual. They were worshipping Dionysus, not as a symbol, but as a force, a god of transformation, of crossing boundaries, of becoming something other than yourself. And in that ritual, something critical happens. The individual disappears as the count group takes over. The voice is no longer personal. It is collective. Now hold that image, because the entire history of drama depends on what happens next. A man steps forward. Thespis. He separates from the chorus, and he speaks as someone else, not as part of the group, but as an individual inside a story. This looks small. It isn't, because in that moment something radical occurs. The human being takes the position that previously belonged to the god. The mask is no longer just ritual. It becomes transformation. The chorus becomes witness. The performance becomes question. This is the shift. From ritual to drama. From collective voice to individual decision. From repetition to inquiry. The dance stops being a prayer and becomes an argument. And that shift, from what is to why it is the beginning of something much larger than theater. It is repeatedly, so they would remember. This series is not about preserving the past. It is about recovering a question. What kind of human being does a democracy require? And what happens when it stops training them? The next step begins with a god, who should not make sense in any rational system. Dionysus. Wild, destabilizing, necessary, and the question of why. The most intellectually ambitious civilization in the ancient world built its most serious institution on top of something that looks like madness. Stay with it. It gets stranger, and then it gets clear.